Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
In it live, you can see that there is a lot of object throwing. Apparently, according to one of our previous guests, Reverend Tracy Blackman, the white nationalist groups are throwing full bottles of water. Earlier, they used brass knuckles and bats to attack members of the clergy, to attack members of anti-fascist groups who've come out to march against them, and against members of Black Lives Matter, all of whom have converged on this park and now spilled into the street, a nearby corner near the University of Virginia, to try to counter this, what they're calling Unite the Right rally, a violent rally at that. Join me now, Max Boots, Senior Fellow at the Council on Foreign Relations, Kurt Bardella, former media consultant for Breitbart.com, Daily Beast politics reporter Aswin Subasang, and former chief White House ethics lawyer, President George W. Bush, Richard Painter. Richard, I'm going to start with you. You've been tweeting about this, and you've had some pretty strong words for those who are out there. If you could reiterate those for our audience.
Well, this is very similar to what happened on the streets of Germany in the early 1930s. This is the face of fascism in the United States. And it is directly the responsibility of this administration in the White House. I've been a Republican for 30 years, but we are the party of Abraham Lincoln and George W. Bush, Ronald Reagan. We are not the party of fascism in America, and we're going to have to reject this. We need to demand today that President Trump fire Sebastian Gorka, Steve Bannon, all the other alt-right neo-fascists in his White House. This is Breitbart News, what you are watching on the streets of Charlottesville. And I, as a Republican, I will remain a Republican, but I will not support fascism, and I will call for the impeachment of this president if he does not fire the neo-fascists in his White House immediately.
And Aswin, is there any, discomfort inside of the White House with the presence of Sebastian Gorka, who is linked to Vitesse Iran, which is a Nazi-linked organization from Hungary, with the presence of Steve Bannon, who ran the website where the alt-right found its home? Is there any chance that these people have job insecurity at this point?
If they have any job insecurity, it has nothing to do with that or what's going on today. And look, I've covered a lot of these different white nationalist events and scuffles, some of which have turned violent, and they're upsetting and disturbing whenever they happen. But look, just to be mildly fair to the White House and President Trump for a moment, I think it's a little bit unfair to blame President Trump for stuff like this. I mean, if he doesn't denounce this on his Twitter feed, while he's more than willing to denounce a botched or bloody facelift, then yeah, go ahead, call him out for that. But I think you're on way more fair and objective. I think you're on way more fair ground if you denounce this administration for its racist crackdown on voting rights, or the intention to uproot and kick out as many immigrant families as they want to. And by the way, those are policies that far predated Trumpism, and I would like to hear what Richard and Max have to say about those things that have been long a part of the Republican DNA, long before President Trump came about and started saying vulgar words.
Richard?
I am happy to respond to that. I have not always agreed with everything that Republican administrations do, but we have never, ever seen rhetoric similar to what has come out of this White House. We never had anyone like Steve Bannon or Sebastian Gorka in the Bush White House. Someone like Sebastian Gorka, who dared to wear a Nazi medal to the president's inauguration. That is disgusting. We never would have tolerated that. And we can disagree. I disagree with my own party on some issues. But we never would have had any of this in the Bush White House. And these people need to be fired immediately. And this is Breitbart News. Breitbart News is a racist organization, and it needs to be acknowledged as such. They should not be given preferential access to the White House, which is what they are now getting under Steve Bannon. And once again, Bannon needs to be fired. Sebastian Gorka and the rest of the fascists out, or we are going to have to remove this president. Our democracy depends upon it. And talking about President Bush or Hillary Clinton and trying to compare this, that is a completely inappropriate comparison to what really is a serious threat to our democracy in 2017.
And Max, give you a chance to respond as well. Is it sort of unfair to tie the president to what we're seeing here in Charlottesville?
Well, I don't think that President Trump is directly responsible for instigating, the events in Charlottesville, but I think it is fair to say that he has catered to the alt-right crowd, including by hiring some of their champions in the White House, by pursuing policies like not only the crackdown on illegal immigration and mass deportations, but also he wants a crackdown on legal immigration, which is something that Republicans going back to Ronald Reagan have always favored, and all of a sudden Trump is opposed to it. He wants to challenge affirmative action in court. So there is no question that he is pursuing policies that elicit support from people like this, even though he's not directly responsible for what's going on here. And, I agree with Richard Painter, somebody who was also a lifelong Republican up until November 9th. I mean, I was a foreign policy advisor to John McCain, Mitt Romney, Marco Rubio. I mean, I couldn't imagine any of those men in the White House employing somebody like Steve Bannon or Sebastian Gorka, or trafficking in some of the hatred or conspiracy mongering that Donald Trump traffics in. This is not what the Republican Party has stood for since its founding in the 1850s. This is a, there have been these fringe elements out there all the time, but the difference with Trump is that he's brought them into the center of power.
And Kurt, and by the way, if you think you're seeing guns in the hands of people, you are. Virginia is an open carry state. You're seeing more clashes. Just producer, is this live or is this tape? Is this live? This is live. This is happening right now. You're seeing these clashes, and some of the people that are in the streets of Charlottesville are armed. You've seen people carrying long guns. This is an open carry state, so this is an incredibly dangerous situation, incredible violence. It's shocking to me personally, just having been in Baltimore, that the police presence is so scant. When we were in Baltimore, there were tanks on the streets of Baltimore. We are seeing a rather thin police presence when we're seeing actual violence, and from reports that we've gotten on the ground, including violence against clergy people, against members of the clergy. I want to go to you on this, Kurt Bardella, because that is sort of the question, right? I mean, you had the Republican Party bring in, starting with Nixon's Southern strategy, this idea of co-opting what used to be Southern Democrats who object Johnson's moves on civil rights, who objected to the idea of desegregation, and sort of courting them and saying that there is a silent majority that is for law and order, and sort of softly, in softer language, targeting people of color and immigrants, etc. We know there was a reaction against the Immigration and Nationalization Act of '65. We know that pulled certain elements out of the Democratic Party and into the GOP. Did Breitbart do something substantially new in terms of what that entity and entities like it brought to the table?
I think what they brought to the table was, for the first time in the 21st century, in a digital era, they brought together a congregating central platform to unite all of these voices, racist voices, and channel them and direct them and focus them in one place every day, that they could go multiple times a day and have content that was written solely for them, to make them feel like it was okay to feel the way that they feel, to inspire them to take action, to inspire them to rally behind a candidate that they thought was one of their own, who uses coded language, who brings on people inside his team, who subscribe to their beliefs, and really they use policy as a mechanism to spread the virus of racism, and targeting minorities and immigrants, and laying the groundwork for volatile situations like this to happen. And the fact of the matter that President Trump at this second has yet to speak about this tells you that every second that goes by that President Trump is silent, and it's not like he's too busy. He's out on vacation, golfing, tweeting. There's no reason why, after what happened last night, that the White House would be silent, if not for the fact that they are sitting there letting this happen. The longer they go silent, the more complicit that they are.
And also, when to that point, when the Ferguson uprising took place, and again there were tanks in the streets, water cannons, lots of arrests, including of journalists. President Obama, who was at the time, it was summer, he was on vacation in Martha's Vineyard, had to come to a camera and say something. The fact that the President of the United States has yet to say anything when there is literal violence in the streets of an American city, isn't it fair to say that the President of the United States is suborning, at minimum, this kind of behavior? He has the alt-right working for him in the West Wing.
Well, I'm not sure if suborning is entirely fair, but look, it obviously would be incredibly nice if the President of the United States would come out and denounce what we're all seeing on our TV screens right now. It would also be nice if he didn't threaten Venezuela with potential military action.
It isn't a matter of it being nice, though. I mean, a President of the United States, when any kind of violence happens in American city, it's not a matter of it being nice. It's what a president normally does.
Yes, I agree with you 100% on that the President of the United States should do that, but obviously the President right now is Donald J. Trump, so the rule book kind of goes out the window. But in terms of actual policy, you had my co-panelist right now just saying that President Trump needs to sack Gorka, he needs to sack Bannon. What about, I wonder what Mr. Boot or Mr. Painter or Mr. Bardella thinks about Jeff Sessions? Are they saying that with those people need to be cleared out of the administration, Jeff Sessions needs to be too?
It's a fair point.
Because policy wouldn't change if you kick Gorka out.
Jeff Sessions is a sort of unusual case right now, as we know, and I am no fan of Jeff Sessions, but remember, if he is forced out of the Attorney General's seat, Donald Trump has the potential to appoint somebody who will fire Bob Mueller. So all things considered, I think most Democrats and most Republicans at this point think that Sessions needs to stay where he is. But I mean, I still disagree with his policies. Clearly, he is somebody who's embraced this populist nationalist agenda, which I think is anathema for true conservative republicanism.
And has done for a very long time, way before Donald Trump was even on the bandwagon. All right, let's go. We have to take a break. We're going to have more on this story after the break. Charlottesville, Virginia, as counter-protesters confront white nationalists marching there today in a, quote, Unite the Right rally. And Joan Walsh is about to join the table from The Nation. Still with us, Max Boot, Aswin Subasang, Kurt Bardella, and Richard Painter. And you know, Max, I'll start with you. There have been responses, and I'll just let our audience know that the governor of Virginia has responded to what you're seeing here today and tweeted out the acts and rhetoric in Charlottesville over the past 24 hours are unacceptable and must stop. A right to free speech is not a right to violence. There's also been a response from the University of Virginia. The president of that university is Teresa Sullivan, who said those who gather to strike fear do not reflect the university's values. I'll also mention for our viewers that in a Facebook post last night, the mayor of Charlottesville, whose name is Mike Signer, I believe, called what happened last night, those marches, a cowardly parade of hatred, bigotry, racism, and intolerance. And actually, instead of going to Max, I'm going to go to Richard first so that we can get Joan seated. Richard, this is... you know, the South has a history. It has a particular kind of history. Virginia, of course, the home of Thomas Jefferson. The place where the rally last night happened was around a statue of Thomas Jefferson, who founded this university. Is this a sign that we have still not come far enough in terms of confronting the history of the Civil War, of the South?
Well, the vast majority of the people in the South do not support this kind of thing, do not support racism or neo-fascism at all. This is a very small minority of people in the South, and we got some of them up in the North, too. So it's not a North-South issue. President Trump needs to send in forces, military. That's what President Eisenhower would have done to deal with this situation, and get these fascists off the streets. They're throwing bottles at the cops and at the clergy. This cannot be tolerated in the United States. And the neo-fascists need to be fired in the White House. Sebastian Gorka and Steve Bannon, the rest of them. We cannot tolerate neo-fascism in the United States. This is not a Democrat-Republican issue, but unfortunately, I, as a Republican, have to live with the fact that my party is in control of the White House and both branches of Congress, and we've got chaos in the streets. And as I say, it's starting to look like Germany in the 1930s. It's not a North-South issue. It's not about the Civil War. It's about 2017 and the serious threat to our democracy right here and now.
Yeah, and, you know, Joan Walsh, Stephen Bannon worked in Hollywood. You know, Stephen Miller, who last week essentially said that the Statue of Liberty, that the Emma Lazarus poem is irrelevant and went on a tirade against immigration, is from California. Right. Talk about cosmopolitan. So it is a North-South issue. This is an issue with a particular strain of ideology that's really taken hold in the GOP.
Oh, right. I mean, I'm sure a lot
of these people.
I'm sorry.
Joan first.
I'm sure a lot of these people are coming from elsewhere. They're not necessarily Virginians or Southerners. And I just have to say, when I saw this start last night, and I saw those little preppy man boys with their mommy's tiki torches marching, at first it was almost funny. You know, tiki torches.
A citronella-scented
Citronella riot, you know. Yeah. Tiki torches are Polynesian. But this morning they showed up in formation with riot gear. At first I thought certain people were cops, but in fact they were, you know, the alt-right folks planning for this. And I listened to Reverend Blackman say they were throwing things at the police.
And hitting them.
And nobody with Black Lives Matter would ever for a moment be allowed to get away with something like that. So the behavior of the police is going to come in for a lot of criticism. And yes, the behavior of Donald Trump. How about Mitch McConnell? Where is he?
Yeah.
I know he's not from Virginia, but he's a huge Republican leader. The silence of Republicans this morning on this issue is going to haunt them.
And we'll have our producer just go through and look and see if there is any response on Twitter. You know, now people go right to Twitter right now to do the response. But to your point, Joan, let's show some images of Ferguson, Missouri. Ferguson happened in August. The president of the United States, who was then Barack Obama, was on vacation in Martha's Vineyard, had to come out, made a statement, came out and went in front of cameras and made a statement. Look at that police presence. There was essentially an army on the streets of Ferguson, Missouri when you had the Ferguson uprising, and it was a very different scene. Dogs were used, hoses were used. I was in Baltimore where, again, there were tanks. There were armed police from all over, from all sorts of jurisdictions around the country in different insignia and regalia and armor, body armor, the bubble body armor. What you're seeing here is an incredibly light police presence, Joan. It's very different.
It's very different. And what I'm seeing on Twitter, I haven't confirmed it myself, is that most of what the police have been doing is interfering with the counter-protesters, not so much with the alt-right protesters. So, you know, there's something really off here in the police presence. But we saw this in Berkeley a few months ago when the alt-right kind of provoked a clash with the Antifa people and really kicked their butts.
Yeah.
The police were sort of parked on the sidelines, and reporters were going up to them saying, what are you doing? Why aren't you out there at least protecting some of these people?
Yeah.
And there was nothing.
And Kurt Bardella, it is part of what sort of animates the alt-right is the, oh, wait a minute, we have Charlottesville City. The city of Charlottesville has sent out a tweet that says, alert unlawful assembly declared for the rally at Emancipation Park. Okay, now we may see a change in the weather here because this has now been declared an unlawful assembly. That is an alert that just went out over Twitter, an alert from the city of Charlottesville. Kurt Bardella, the sense of sort of impunity, speak to that a little bit among these members of the alt-right.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't catch that, but I just wanted to say one thing. The chairwoman of the RNC, Ronna McDaniel, did just tweet, the hate and bigotry on display in Charlottesville is dangerous and cowardly. So we have at least one person at the national level now who's spoken out. I agree with Joan that we need a lot more leadership right now, vocal leadership from Republicans, from Republican leaders, elected leaders in Congress and in Washington. You know, this is the Republican Party right now that's on display, Donald Trump's Republican Party, and if they don't want to be tied to it, if they don't want to be associated to it, people like Mitch McConnell, you know, Speaker Paul Ryan, John Thune, Marco Rubio, Ted Cruz, anybody who proclaims to be a leader who doesn't want to be associated with this type of hatred and racism, bigotry, and ignorance, they need to speak out right now, loud and clear.
Yeah, and I want to just let everyone know, and I'm just emailing this to my producers as we speak. I was just texted a tweet from the Prince William County Republican Party, PWC GOP, on your Twitter account if you want to look it up, and they just tweeted out, let's be very clear about what's happening in Charlottesville. There is nothing conservative about white nationalism or racial supremacy. They attach a statement that says the Republican Party of Virginia stands for freedom and against white supremacy or the superiority of any race over another. We support free speech, and we also uphold our Declaration of Independence, principle that all men are created equal. The message of white nationalism and racial supremacy is not only immoral, it is contradictory to the Constitution of the United States. They go on to say also there is nothing conservative about white nationalist racial supremacy. As an African American, and this is the person who sent out the statement, I am proud that Virginia will respond to this rally as a model to the nation for freedom, inclusiveness, and the equality of opportunity of all people. And that is a message from DJ Jordan, who's the vice chairman of the Prince William County Republican Committee. So I'm going to tweet that out so you guys can get that on my Twitter feed as well. So there has been some response. We've not heard yet a response from the White House, however. The governor of Virginia has responded. The University of Virginia has responded. Look at these clashes, dragging an American flag between two people. Now we see some water hoses happening. This is amazing. This is happening on the streets of an American city. There are people out in Charlottesville with guns. There are people who are armed. And there are people who are fighting, throwing bottles, throwing water. Homie, what did you just say? Who are we going to? James, who are we going to? I'm sorry. Okay, I think we are going to just stay with this coverage. You now do see an armed police presence. You can see them standing in body armor. Not a lot of movement among those police officers, but they are showing up. You are starting to see their presence. And just incredible scene in an American city all over the proposed removal of a statue of Robert E. Lee from a park that is now called Emancipation Park. Used to be Robert E. Lee Park. This is happening on or near the campus of the University of Virginia in Charlottesville, Virginia. Police have been struck. Clergy have been struck. Now we're starting to see a little bit of armor here, but just an incredible scene on the streets of this American city. Max, you had a final comment.
Well, just a quick comment, Joy, which is I think you certainly will see Republicans condemning this, but ultimately what we need is not just condemnations from various Republicans. You need some moral leadership from the White House. And even though Trump himself, I imagine at some point will issue a statement condemning this,
sure,
he doesn't show the kind of moral leadership that we had from President Obama, that we had from President Bush, that we had from President Clinton, trying to bring people closer together, trying to heal these racial divisions. Donald Trump is a divider, not a uniter. He constantly tries to set one group of Americans against another. He scapegoats Muslims. He scapegoats Muslims. He scapegoats transgendered people, various individuals, in order to achieve his own political success. And that is deeply troubling. And again, I don't blame Trump directly for what's going on here, but I do blame him for the moral and leadership vacuum that we are seeing at the top in the White House right now in this country. And it's a disgrace and it's a shame.
Yeah, let me give everybody a final comment. Joan.
I guess I do blame Donald Trump because I think he really did pull the lid off this. These folks were out there, but their numbers have skyrocketed since he declared his candidacy, basically declaring Mexicans who are here undocumented Mexicans, rapists, and criminals.
Yeah.
And I think that he stoked the fires of this kind of thing. He refused to put it down, and he put Steve Bannon in the White House. So yeah, I do blame him. There's a reason we didn't see this 3 years ago, 4 years ago.
And Kurt Bardella, Breitbart, there's been inklings that they want to expand. They want to expand into Europe. They want to expand as a business. At some point, are they going to, in your view, start to distance themselves from this, what they call the alt-right, this white nationalist movement?
Well, they haven't yet, and there's not a single bit of content right now on their homepages about what's going on right now, the biggest story right now in America today, and there are crickets on it. So that tells me that this is exactly the kind of stuff that they want to have happen and that they hope to spread elsewhere. And frankly, the Republican Party needs to change its philosophy on a lot of things to prevent this type of stuff from happening. A lot of their policies like that are racist. When they talk about incarceration over treatment when drug treatment, that targets minorities, pure and simple.
Yeah, Richard Painter, I've been told by friends who are associated with the two Bush administrations that it would be a different party if you still had either of the Bushes still at the top of it.
This isn't a policy debate. This is about neo-fascism. And it can happen anywhere. We had a bombing in a house of worship in Minnesota just days ago, and Sebastian Gorka in the White House had the nerve to say that we were faking it. We're not going to tolerate this in the United States. And once again, the neo-fascists are going to be removed from this administration. Gorka, Bannon, every one of them, or this president is going to be removed from office.
Yeah.
And that's the way it's going to work. And I'm saying that as a Republican, and the vast majority of Republicans in the United States are going to agree with me on that. We're not going to tolerate what's happening in Charlottesville or what happened in Bloomington, Minnesota a week ago with a bombing of a mosque. We don't tolerate this in America.
Well, thank you to our panel, Joan Walsh, Max Boot, Aswin Subasang, Kurt Bardella, Richard Painter. Thank you guys all.
Charlottesville, Virginia, following the clashes that happened earlier in the day between protesters who were clashing with white supremacists who had gathered there for their own rally. Back with us now, our panel, Andre Bauer, Van Jones, and Anousheh Hussein. Evan McMullen and Cedric Alexander. We heard some strong words from Governor Terry McAuliffe right off the bat. He says, I have a message to white supremacists and Nazis who came into Charlottesville today. Go home. He went on to say, you are not patriots. You came here today to hurt people. There is no place for you here. There is no place for you in America. Van, those words were clear and direct.
I think those were the words that a lot of people needed to hear and want to hear continually from the president, from the governor. And listen, there has to be a universal condemnation of the loudest sort. We now have 3 Americans dead. Listen, Andre says we don't have all the facts. I'm going to go out on a limb, and I'm going to say that the person who rammed into that crowd did so for political reasons. So there's an act of political terrorism, and I think it's going to be revealed that it was white supremacist terrorism. So one of the things that has to happen now, you now have 3 people who are dead, and there may be more. When Americans start being murdered and killed in our country for political reasons by Nazis, if that country can't come together on that, we are in deep trouble. There is no political downside, folks, to condemning Nazis killing Americans. I promise you, we're not that far gone. So this is the opportunity for us to come together, and the President of the United States should be leading the charge. If this president does not want to be sending dog signals and winks and nods to white supremacists and Nazis, this guy is one of the clearest communicators in the history of American politics. He should come out just as clear as the governor. If the governor can be that clear, the president should be more clear, because he's on the world stage and the whole world is watching. This is an absolute outrage. I don't get it. When you have someone who says, in one part of his speech, he loves everybody. There are now, it looks like, if you look online, that the Nazis are celebrating his speech. It's not been confirmed yet, but they're saying he's saying he loves us. He is not being clear enough. He's got to be more clear.
But Van, just to be fair for the president, he's not a white supremacist himself. Is he being held responsible in a sense for something he didn't have control over?
Hey, listen, if there were a Muslim terrorist attack, he's not a Muslim terrorist. If there were, if the people who love science fiction started blowing stuff up, he probably doesn't like science fiction. It doesn't matter what the terrorist is about. He has to condemn terrorism. He has to condemn extremism. And I don't understand why he feels like if it's a white supremacist group, he's got to tiptoe. He has more authority as somebody who is on the right to say there's a clean right and there's a dirty right. The clean right has ideas that I agree with. The dirty right traffics in violence and anti-Jewish bigotry and racism, and it has no place in my party, my movement, or my country. If he said that, it would shock these people back on their heels. The fact he hasn't said it, and the fact we now have 3 people dead and nothing from the president yet. He has not said one thing about the person who died earlier. He hasn't said one thing about the person who, now we got 3. I don't understand why or how the President of the United States can sit back and look at Americans being murdered on broad daylight and not come out and say, stop killing Americans, you Nazis. The governor can do it, the president can.
So, Andre, let me turn to you, because you defended the president's comments earlier. The president's comments do stand in stark contrast to what we just heard from Governor Terry McAuliffe, who was very direct in going after people who were there to express hate. What is partisan about that?
I don't think there was anything partisan. I thought the governor was fair in what he said, too. I don't have a problem with what... I'm not one of these that every time somebody on the other side says something, I condemn it. I mean, there's certain guests that come on this show that no matter what, they're going to condemn Donald Trump. I mean, that's a given.
Well, I'm not one of them. I'm not one of them there, Andre.
He stated where he felt. He said what he thought was right. When he gets more facts, I feel like he'll speak again. But it's very easy to go off and say things, you know, what are politically popular. But I think you get the facts first. And look, I as well, and I've had to deal with certain things, and you try to get the facts before you just immediately come to conclusions. And I think tomorrow will be a clearer day for the president to make more comments. But he emphatically said...
Hold on just a second, Andre. Let me stop you, because the facts of the matter are these people who were there, they were very upfront about their intentions in coming to the park, to the Confederate monument, the statue that is being removed there in Charlottesville. They were there to promote their white supremacist ideology. I don't think that anybody's questioning what their intentions were. And so for them to be there and the president not to say, that isn't okay for you to have it's okay for you to have that opinion, but it's not okay for you to bring that hatred into our country. To not call a spade like that is where we're hearing the criticism.
Again, he called out what he thought was fair and reasonable. He denounced it. He just didn't denounce it enough for a lot of folks on the other side. But again, he said what he thought was more than, I thought it was more than reasonable. He said there's no place for this. He even tweeted out, "This is sad." You know, he doesn't
tweeted that out, but he was asked specifically after his remarks, what do you say to the white supremacists who were there? What do you say to people like David Duke? He did not answer.
Andre, he didn't respond to any questioning. Maybe he didn't want to open it up for questions right now. Maybe he had other things he was working on. Maybe he didn't want to continue to answer questions without having more facts for him as the President of the United States.
Andre, what are you waiting for, Andre? What is enough facts for you? From the past 48 hours, just in the past 48 hours, we have seen Nazis coming in. They have been chanting Nazi slogans. They have identified themselves very clearly. Today, David Duke said he came out at the protest. He said this is a turning point in taking our country back. He mentioned the president by name. He said this is why we voted for Donald Trump. What do you need? What needs to happen for Donald Trump to say this is not okay? Just like the governor just said.
You need to know who the victims were and who the driver was.
The victims were Americans. The driver was American and the victims were American. We are Americans.
Again,
Evan McMullen, there have been a lot of Republicans who have come out and condemned what has happened there. And they've also come out, I know, and that's my point. The president condemned what happened, but he did it in a way that was very different than what we've seen from some of the other Republican leaders. Do you see a stark contrast in how the president has handled it, or are we making a mountain out of a molehill? Evan?
I see people that are going to cast stones about Donald Trump in just about every way he does anything, that are going to continue to beat on him no matter what he does.
Let me get Evan in here. That question was for Evan McMullen.
If I could just jump in here. If Donald Trump came out and said what we just heard, or anything like it from Terry McAuliffe or from the mayor in Charlottesville, nobody would be criticizing him.
That's right.
In fact, people like me would be elated and relieved.
Exactly.
What we just saw there, excuse me, I'm going to finish. No, I'm going to finish. Excuse me, sir. I listened to you for a long time, and now I'm going to finish.
I didn't think you were going to answer that.
What we just saw is the kind of leadership that America has been waiting for the last 6 or 7 months. And I got to tell you, it was refreshing to hear it. We should hear more of it from Washington, D.C. Now, I've got to tell you another thing about this situation. I spent time in Republican politics and with Republican leaders, and Republican leaders tend not to speak out against racism in America unless it's some disastrous situation like this, and then they come out. Not all of them. Some of them are good. Some of them do more than others. But most of them don't say anything unless it's absolutely obvious like today. The reason for that is that the reason, no, I'm going to finish. Nope, I'm going to finish, sir.
Hold on, Andre, let him finish.
The reason why they don't do that, and I know because I've been a part of it, I've seen it myself, is that there's a taboo within the Republican Party about attacking racism in America. And I know that that's the case because when you do it as a conservative, you get attacked by elements within the party. And that's where we are. And not all Republicans, of course, are racist. I was raised by Republicans who are not at all and who welcome Americans of all backgrounds and are not at all like this. But there is an element of the Republican base that is racist. And our leaders are afraid to stand up to them because if they do so, they'll be criticized and they'll potentially lose votes. And so they don't do it. But that's not public service. That's self-service. And we need leaders, especially on the Republican and conservative side these days, who will serve the country. And serving the country means standing up to these bigots. This country was built on equality and liberty, and we need all of our leaders, regardless of party, to stand up for those truths.
Andre, can you argue against that?
Well, what I would say is I'm in probably the most southern state in America. And Democrats put the Confederate flag on the dome, and the Republicans took it off. Nikki Haley led the charge to take it off the monument as well. So Republicans have taken the leadership on this. To say that they're scared of some certain group is totally untrue. And for him to say
that's one example. Nikki Haley's great. There should be many more of her.
Hey,
let me read you for a second what David Duke tweeted after the president's remarks. And I don't want to give any more airtime to David Duke in terms of his comments, but I think it's telling in terms of where some of the people are standing in this country right now. He writes, I would recommend you take a good look in the mirror and remember it was white Americans who put you in the presidency, not radical leftists. I mean, that was a direct message to the president following his remarks. So Andre, do you think Trump was in a no-win situation today, that no one would be happy with his comments after his remarks?
I think that is a fair assessment. However, he has emphatically said, I don't want to be associated with David Duke or anything about him. I don't even want his support. And usually when you're a politician, look, I was elected 14 different elections. You want anybody, just because somebody supports you does not mean you support them. You want anybody support you can get. He said, not only do I not agree with him, I don't want his support.
No, you do not. You do not want anybody's support. If you're a leader, you stand for principles, and if you're supported by white supremacists in America, look, this is not difficult. This is not difficult. This is like hitting a beach ball with a bat. It's not difficult. If you're supported by white supremacists in America, you oppose that and you oppose them and you fight against them every day.
Hey, Evan, I think you may have misheard. Evan, you may have misheard Andre. I think Andre and you are making the same point at this point. He's just saying that Donald Trump has denounced it. And I would just say to you, Andre, I think for a lot of us, a one-time denunciation when somebody is consistently stirring up the pot, it falls a little bit short. The problem that we have, Andre, is that he has no problem mentioning CNN multiple times to attack us. He has no problem mentioning, every leader in the world he doesn't like or in the Congress he doesn't like multiple times. But with David Duke and with the white supremacists, I've never heard him say white supremacist terrorist. I've never heard him say white nationalist terrorist. I've never heard him be as specific about the white nationalist terrorists who just killed 3 people as he insisted that Barack Obama be about the problems we have with radical Muslims. And so when you have those kinds of inconsistencies, here's the problem that we have, Andre. You are somebody who is in the Republican Party, has been a leading light. You've been anti-racist. We all know that about you. But there are people who, if you look at what's happening online right now, there are white supremacist groups that are saying, hey, Donald Trump didn't attack us. They're saying, God bless Donald Trump, because they expected to get maybe some blowback from the president. They didn't get it. You might see the positive in the statement, but people that you hate and don't like and people I hate and don't like saw what was not said and think that Donald Trump gave them a pass today, and that is dangerous.
Cedric, jump in here. I know you have some to contribute to this conversation.
Yeah, the only thing I want to say, a moment ago it was just stated by Mr. Bauer that the president has stated in the past that he do not want any affiliation with any group that promotes hate. And that is true when he was on the campaign trail. But what needs to happen at this very moment in American history, particularly from the demonstration of violence we saw today, he should have made that clear to the American people today, not as running for president, but as president of the United States.
Can you see any reason why he wouldn't have done that? Could it have been unintentional for this backlash to come because his remarks didn't hit the mark?
Well, what's at risk here, quite frankly, for the president and what the perception of the American people is, to be honest with you, he did not respond to it, and he did not call this group out, because many Americans, as many of your guests have stated here today, they believe that is much of his base, and not just his base that you saw out in the street of Charlottesville, but those who are at home hiding behind their Twitter and their emails who are also making these horrible remarks. Because there are people out there who, unfortunately, that support what they saw here today and have supposedly supported this president. So that creates an environment, quite frankly, in which the president himself had an opportunity today to denounce groups such as the KKK that has been responsible ever since their inception, which nobody can refute, of violence, and groups like neo-Nazi groups that are totally anti-Semitic, anti-black, anti-brown, anti-everything that is not white.
Do you buy the argument that perhaps he didn't want to address those groups specifically because he did not want to increase or escalate the tension and the violence that's already there on that scene?
That is no excuse, because here very clearly, you just heard what the governor of Virginia just said. He just took a leadership position as a governor in his state and say we will not tolerate violence of any sort from any group. We are not going to see ourselves as a racist state. We're not going to associate ourselves with racism and violence of this type. And anybody today that was involved in it, whether you were on the right or on the left, and you took the first punch or you threw the first brick, you were wrong. But here again, we're talking about groups that were vividly, clearly exhibited who they were today through their dress, through their makeshift attire of being military, which in my opinion is embarrassing to the U.S. military to even drag them in this with your makeshift military attire. This is not representative of our U.S. military, and I take offense to that as an American. But those who wish to carry themselves out in the way that they did today has to be acceptable, unacceptable to all of us in this nation. There's no place for it. We're not going backwards. It's not even possible at this point. We have to figure out how we're going to move forward as a nation and move from blaming to resolving. We have a bigger threat that is upon us. It's called North Korea. And wherever we are in all of this, from a global perspective, one thing we cannot do, we cannot fight anybody on this planet being divided. And we have to come together as Americans. And today was not an example of that because everybody was watching. Everybody.
Van, I know you have taken issue with the president's comments in that he said he doesn't condemn the violence on any side. And let me just look at these specific words. I don't want to misquote it here. He says, we condemn in the strongest possible terms this egregious display of hatred, bigotry, and violence on many sides. On many sides. It has been going on for a long time in our country. Not Donald Trump, not Barack Obama. It has been going on for a long, long time. It has not a place in America. What is wrong with that statement specifically?
Listen, the thing is, there's just enough good in that statement that some people are confused as to why those of us who are concerned. So I'm glad that you gave us the language. Let me tell you, the problem is the many sides. Can you imagine if at Fort Hood, when there was a Muslim shooter who shot down a bunch of Americans, a president came out and said, listen, there's been a lot of violence on many sides. That would not work because you have dead bodies, you have people preparing for funerals, 3 families preparing for funerals today. That's only on one side. The murder, using the car as a weapon, showing up with the shields, all that sort of stuff, that's only coming from one side. And so when he then says many sides, what that does is it creates what's called a false equivalence. Well, everybody here is wrong. Everybody here is kind of equally wrong. Everybody calm down. Everybody be nice. But there's only one side that's murderous. And so I don't think he would do that in another context. If there was another act of terrorism. And so what's happening now, and you're now, look, I don't ask, I don't want to quote anything. We're not quoting it on CNN. But if you look at what the white supremacists are saying online, they are praising this speech. They think it's a good speech because he didn't go after them. And so I think you've got a problem now, which is that, yes, the president said some things that are good. And Andre, says that no matter what the president says, we're going to attack him. I don't attack the president when he says good stuff, and liberals kick my butt from here to across the street. I'm somebody willing to give him credit where it's due, but it's not due today. He owed the families more than he gave them, and he owes the country more. This is a country that has fought against Nazism and fascism. We've shed blood over that. We lost Dr. King over that, and this president should stand clearly against that kind of hateful violence in our country, and he didn't do it today.
Why not? Why didn't he do that today, Andre, and come out with a statement that says white supremacy is not okay?
Well, again, I don't think he, when they had the riots during his inauguration, he didn't specifically name groups. He condemned it. And so I don't think it today was about going to specific groups. He said he didn't agree with it. He thought it was bad. I'm paraphrasing now. But again, he sent a message as the President of the United States. He didn't agree with this behavior and wanted it to stop. And I think as more information comes in, I think you'll hear from him again. And he may be, I hope he can touch on ears of folks like Van Jones, who are at least always fair and reasonable, and get the spot where they feel comfortable that their president, our president, said what needed to be said.
Does it bother you if white supremacist groups are praising the president's comments because he didn't call them out?
Well, in a group of, in a country that has hundreds of millions of people, you can always find a few people that are going to say something. You don't see, hundreds of people saying this. It's a very small group of people. I mean, most communities, my community, would ostracize those folks. Nobody would have anything to do with those kind of people. And so I don't think it's a large group of people. You're going to find a few crazy people, always of different groups, but there's no mass group that I know of that's supporting any of these individuals.
Yeah, but I do know that the Southern Poverty Law Center that of course monitors different hate groups has said that they expected this. The expectation going into today was this was going to be the largest gathering, hate gathering, their words, in decades in this country. I mean, that doesn't come out of nowhere.
Do we know how many people that was?
They were expecting up to 6,000 people. I don't think we have an official count. That's how many they were anticipating.
So let's say there were 10,000 and 5,000 on each side. So in a country with several hundred million people, 5,000 people in the biggest group ever assembled is all they could come up with. That's good news for our country.
Well,
how is that good news?
Why? Yes. I'm so sorry, Anna. Why are we trying to play this off, Andre, as if anything positive that came out of this? Can we just say that at the end of the day, the president had a perfect opportunity to speak out against white supremacists and white supremacy, and he didn't? It's not enough. It's not enough.
Bigotry. He spoke out against hatred.
The most generic tweet followed by a statement like that doesn't count. It's not enough. And thank goodness we had the governor step in the way he just did. We need leadership right now. 3 Americans are dead, and our president wrapped up his statement by talking about children having the right to go play with their parents and have a good time.
All right, guys, let's leave it there. I appreciate all of you for joining us and offering different viewpoints. Appreciate the discussion. Thanks. We'll be right back.
So grateful for your company. Glad to have you here. I'm Christy Paul.
I'm Victor Blackwell. Good morning to you. We're talking this morning about the domestic terror that hit Charlottesville, Virginia. After a day of clashes at a white nationalist rally, there was this car you see here speeding through the crowd of protesters, hitting 2 other cars, and those cars hitting people. A woman was killed as she was trying to cross that street. 19 others were hurt in that attack. And then on top of that, 15 people hurt during the rally.
And President Trump calls for an end to the violence, quote, on many sides, and is criticized for what some call a muted response to this attack on unarmed protesters. The suspect, we should point out, 20-year-old James Alex Field Jr. from Ohio, now being held on several charges. His mother did speak to a reporter yesterday and said she thought the rally he was going to had something to do with the president.
Was pretty unaware of kind of what the definition of alt-right would be. I mean, she kind of fumbled over the language. I don't think she had a clear idea of even what that definition would be. She said to me that she doesn't try to get too much into his, political beliefs, and that she's, not too well versed in his political leanings in any way. So, I don't get a sense that she necessarily knew what he was headed for this weekend.
I want to go back to that press conference yesterday. The president condemned the hatred, the bigotry, and the violence, he said, and he spread the blame.
We condemn in the strongest possible terms this egregious display of hatred, bigotry, and violence on many sides, on many sides.
Here to discuss, CNN senior media correspondent Brian Stelter. Brian, you say that this was the worst day of his presidency thus far.
You could make the case based on the wide range of criticism that was coming in large part from the GOP, from members of Trump's own party. You would expect Hillary Clinton, Nancy Pelosi, and other Democratic leaders to be tweeting and sharing criticism of the president for his words. And that happened on Saturday. But it was the number of GOP leaders who also implicitly and in many cases explicitly criticized President Trump and called on him to do more. I noticed a tweet from Ryan Lizzo Liza of The New Yorker and CNN that we can put on screen. There were many comments like this, and I think Liza was channeling it. He said, "Today is by far the most disgraceful day of Donald Trump's presidency." Others describing it as a new low point for President Trump. I think partly, Christy, because it was seen as a missed opportunity to do and say more. If you think back to President George W. Bush visiting a mosque after 9/11, promoting unity with the Muslim faith. If you think about President Obama urging calm and responsibility on the night of the Ferguson riot in 2014, there are many examples of speeches you can go back and read from past presidents where they met their moment, where they spoke eloquently and at length, at detail, and weren't wary of calling out things by name. So all the criticism of the president yesterday, and now heading into Sunday morning, all the political chat shows, I think you could make the case this was his low point of the presidency.
So it's a missed opportunity, Brian. Is it an opportunity that can be made up, or would it just be seen as too little too late at this point?
Or too obvious, you're right, reacting to all the criticism. Well, keep in mind, the president on Friday promised to hold a press conference on Monday. He said he was going to have a pretty big press conference in Washington on Monday. So let's see if he follows through on that and does hold that event. That could be a really important moment. It'll be taken live by every network. He'd have a chance to speak at length there. I also would keep in mind he's planning on visiting New York in the coming days. This may provide more motivation, more fodder for anti-Trump protesters, the kind of counter-protesters that were there in Charlottesville yesterday, some of whom were then run over by that man driving that vehicle. This kind of situation and this criticism of the president may provide more motivation for those protesters. So I'm curious to see if we see more of that sort of action in the coming days.
You talked about Ryan Liza, but what about John McCain, Rob Portman? They're all responding on Twitter, and they're using the terminology people were waiting to hear from the president.
Exactly. Those GOP leaders, senators, congressmen, governors, mayors, when it's coming from your own party, I think that's why you can make the case that it was his worst day in office yet. Listen, those kind of judgments can sound kind of petty when we're talking about 3 lives lost in Charlottesville and dozens injured. But it's precisely because of those injuries and deaths that this was an important moment for the president. We know that there's sort of a cable news feedback loop, right? We've talked a lot about the president reacting instantly to what he sees on television. But that didn't quite happen yesterday. There was a delayed reaction, and then a lot of people think it was not a full-throated reaction. We've seen some segments of conservative media come into the president's support, arguing that left-wing violence is also a problem that needs to be taken seriously. But for the most part, I'm struck by how universal the criticism was yesterday, perhaps a new low point for the president.
All right. Brian Stelter, thank you so much.
It is a sad morning after in Charlottesville, Virginia. A federal civil rights investigation is opening now, and an Ohio man faces a state murder charge after a march by white supremacists turns deadly. President Trump is under fire for his response to the violence, adding to the spotlight he faces this week. The president interrupting his vacation to pick a trade fight with China as he grows frustrated that Beijing won't or can't do more to rein in North Korea's missile and nuclear programs. It's a gamble after a week of escalating Trump rhetoric that at times caught even his own national security team off guard.
North Korea best not make any more threats to the United States. They will be met with fire and fury like the world has never seen.
Plus, there's no summer break for Republican dysfunction. Still without even one big legislative win, the president sidesteps any blame and lashes out at the Senate Majority Leader.
I'm very disappointed in Mitch, but if he gets these bills passed, I'll be very happy with it, and I'll be the first to admit it. But honestly, repeal and replace of Obamacare should have taken place.
We begin, though, with that state of emergency and the political fallout after Saturday's deadly violence following a march by white nationalists and neo-Nazis.
I have a message to all the white supremacists and the Nazis who came into Charlottesville today. Our message is plain and simple. Go home. You are not wanted in this great Commonwealth. Shame on you. You pretend that you're patriots, but you are anything but a patriot.
With us to share their reporting and their insights, Margaret Talev of Bloomberg Politics, CNN's Manu Raju, Michael Scher of the New York Times, and Karen Demersion of the Washington Post. What presidents say at big moments matters. Sometimes what they don't say matters just as much. Now, make no mistake, President Trump did condemn the deadly Charlottesville violence.
We condemn in the strongest possible terms this egregious display of hatred, bigotry, and violence on many sides. On many sides. It's been going on for a long time in our country. Not Donald Trump, not Barack Obama. This has been going on for a long, long time.
But that many sides reference, put simply, failed the presidential test, and it is the source of remarkable condemnation this morning across the political spectrum. No, President Trump cannot be held responsible for the Trump campaign signs held by some of the white nationalist marchers, nor can he be held responsible for these words by one of America's best-known hate mongers.
This represents a turning point for the people of this country. We are determined to take our country back. We're going to fulfill the promises of Donald Trump. That's what we believed in. That's why we voted for Donald Trump, because he said he's going to take our country back.
But it should not be too much to expect the President of the United States to specifically condemn neo-Nazis and white nationalists, especially when they claim some affinity with him. By failing to do so, the president now is as much of an issue as the marchers and their reprehensible views. Senator Cory Gardner of Colorado, one of many, many, many Republicans who say the president came up way short. Mr. President, we must call evil by its name, Gardner tweeted. These were white supremacists, and this was domestic terrorism. White supremacist neo-Nazis and anti-Semites are the antithesis of our American values, added Florida Republican Congresswoman Ileana Ros-Lehtinen. There are no other sides to hatred and bigotry. We begin the morning with a simple question: why? Why? This could be a very different morning. This is not hard. The president understands his history. The president had the access to the video. We assume the president has a competent staff. If he had added one sentence to what he said, and there were some very strong words in what the president said. Let's make no mistake about that. If he added one sentence saying, "I do not stand with you, I do not stand for you, you do not represent me, go away, you have no place," something to that effect, anything to that effect, and we're having a different conversation this morning. But he didn't when he spoke, he didn't in his tweets, and he's had hours since, and he hasn't cleaned it up. Why?
He chose a different sentence to stick in there, actually, if we want to be perfectly honest about it. That "on all sides" was what he chose to add to what was otherwise a very strongly worded speech, not the sentence that you're suggesting, which would have been to name, and that many Republicans wanted to say too, which was to name white nationalism by name, Nazis by name. That's the very different choice to go with "on all sides" instead.
This was a slam dunk. I mean, this was very easy for him to do, to condemn white supremacists. That's something, of course, that virtually everybody who is in politics, they do. They condemn white supremacists. And that's what we saw last night from Republican after Republican. I thought Cory Gardner's statement was remarkable in the sense that he's a member of the Senate Republican leadership. He's someone who's been careful in his criticism of the president, unlike a lot of other Republicans. And he represents, of course, a purple state, a swing state, and something that could, a state that could easily flip, a seat that he could potentially lose when he runs again for re-election. But the larger question that I think a lot of Republicans have is, why does the president show no nuance in dealing with North Korea, dealing with Mitch McConnell, dealing with other people that he is concerned with? But when it comes to white supremacists or even Vladimir Putin, he does not go out and condemn them. That's a real question. I think a lot of Republicans and Democrats.
Well, I think a lot of Americans. I think a lot of Americans are asking this. We could be having a very different conversation this morning about a president who 7 months in, a lot of people saying he's drifting, changed the conversation. If he just looked straight into the camera and said, "I don't represent you, you don't represent me, go home."
Well, and look, part of being president is finding opportunities, right? If there's been a lot of criticism over the months and over the years that Donald Trump hasn't denounced sort of the white nationalist, he brings Bannon into the White House, but here's a moment, right? Like, here's the opportunity for him to fix some of that. You've got white nationalists and Nazis, not just sort of it's not a generic question. They're marching in an American city and then somebody dies. Like, that's the opportunity that if you want to, you can take and sort of put this to rest, and he didn't.
When as yesterday's events were unfolding, I interpreted the president's initial caution with his words, or sort of slowness to speak, as wanting to get it right, wanting to understand who was driving the car, what they were a part of, the big picture. But as the hours have gone on and the story has become clearer, I think the problem for the president is that the absence of a more decisive statement creates a vacuum where everyone is going to interpret what he's doing and what he's not doing. And so even now, if he doesn't, even if he didn't want to insert himself, even if he didn't want to make a pointed statement, the expectation now is very high. It's Sunday morning. He has an entire day to figure out how to handle this. But at this point, we have no word from the White House on updated plans.
Plenty of time to clean this up and to change this. He should have got it right the first time. Any president with a competent staff, and just the president by himself, should have understood the moment. Should have understood the moment. But to your point, the Daily Stormer, which is the hateful propaganda of the marchers, the neo-Nazis and the white supremacists, they said this after the president. Trump's comments were good. He didn't attack us. He just said the nation should come together. Nothing specific against us. He said that we need to study why people are so angry and implied that there was hate on both sides. No condemnation at all. Now, again, that may not be fair to the president. However, he has to know that. He has to, if he had just simply looked them in the eye and said, I don't speak for you, you don't speak for me, what you're doing is reprehensible. They can't do that.
Right. Also, words have meanings to different people, unfortunately. We don't have like absolute definitions of words. And to a white supremacist who's putting up a banner that says diversity equals white genocide, bigotry doesn't mean, oh, you're talking about white supremacists. It means maybe something else. It means maybe anti-white bigotry. I mean, in the worldview that these people have. And the president, I mean, this is not happening in a vacuum. At this point, the president or his advisors should understand this and should understand that he has been criticized when he is not absolutely explicit about what he means by calling out Nazis. Remember the David Duke dust-up, you know, but whether he would denounce that. And even that, even the white nationalism reactions don't exist in a vacuum. I mean, there are people who have questions about where the moral barometer of this administration is because of things like not mentioning Jews on Holocaust Remembrance Day, or exactly. It's just it's thing after thing after thing after thing, and this is the most serious or egregious thing that we've seen because of what Michael was saying. You know, it resulted in death. It is so blatant.
The death of a woman who was hit by that car. 2 Virginia State police officers dead in a helicopter that crashed that was overseeing down there for that reason. To that point. Is it a breaking point is the question for me, in the sense that you see Republicans coming out. There are a lot of criticism from Democrats, and we'll get to that throughout the hour. But if you look, we mentioned Cory Gardner, we mentioned Ileana Ros-Lehtinen, and more moderate Republicans, you might say. Ted Cruz, a very conservative, former primary rival of the president. The Nazis, the KKK, and white supremacists are repulsive and evil, and all of us have a moral obligation to speak out against the lies, bigotry, anti-Semitism, and hatred that they propagate. I urge the Department of Justice to immediately investigate and prosecute this grotesque act of domestic terrorism. That from Senator Ted Cruz. Senator Orrin Hatch, we should call evil by its name. My brother didn't give his life fighting Hitler for Nazi ideas to go unchallenged here at home. Yeah. This is not, Mr. President, you know, you're a little off here. This is, Mr. President, what planet are you on?
This is the Republican Party signaling very clearly, if you won't say it, we will, and by the way, you should say it. And, you know, there are two things going on. One are the political ramifications of what's happening. The other is this is a moment of national tragedy. It's a moment of national discussion. It's August. It was a Saturday. I think a lot of people were doing other things when this happened, have come slow to the story. It's a terrible thing that's happened, and it's a moment of crisis. It requires presidential.
And look, you know, one of the things that happens, presidents and White Houses sometimes get things wrong. I remember when President Obama announced the beheading of the journalist in ISIS in 2014 when he was on Martha's Vineyard, and then went to play golf. And it was sort of a moment that they sort of misjudged and misunderstood the sort of feeling in the country. But they came back and quickly, you know, canceled the rest of his golf for the rest of the trip and kind of changed it up. And it's 8 o'clock, 8:12 now. I mean, you know, the question is, does he go and play golf today in Bedminster before he fixes this? Does he come out and make a statement? Does he at least tweet? I mean, it's usually by now, it's you know, he would have been up and had fired off a couple of tweets.
And so we know we know who he is. We know he followed the coverage yesterday. We know he's up early on a Sunday morning reviewing the newspapers and the cable news program. And so the question I'll come back to as we close this block and we'll continue the conversation together is why? Why? Let's assume we're all human. Human beings make mistakes. If they were being cautious, if they didn't have a full information, if they wanted to wait yesterday, fine. But why? Why are we still sitting here with the president saying many sides, not white supremacy is evil, neo-Nazis have no place in America, I do not speak for you?
And John, remember, last week, Sebastian Gorka, one of the president's advisors in the White House, was suggested in a radio interview that white supremacy may not be as big of a problem as some people in the media believe. And that, of course, is crazy, considering that white supremacists have been responsible for a significant amount of deaths since 9/11, actually even more than Islamic terrorists here in this country. So there is a concern that there's some people in this White House may not be taking the threat of white supremacists seriously enough, and the president, by not denouncing that, feeds into that perception.
I would add ratings. Trump seems concerned about alienating any part of his base. And if these people are claiming to be a part of his base, that is potentially a problem. And look at his approval numbers. Although, if you're right, Manu, if Gorka is right about what he said, he shouldn't be that concerned. Because, I mean, there were a few hundred people in the streets. This is not like a million people movement type of thing. It is small numbers, but with a very, very large...
There is no job in the world worth having if that's the only way to get it.